Good afternoon and good day. Welcome to the webinar on Indo Pacific Construct, Australia, India, Japan, and South Korea Challenges and Prospects. My name is Dr. Dalbir Alwat. I am from the Department of Security Studies and Criminology, Macquarie University, Australia. I will moderate today's webinar. First and foremost, I thank the Asia Institute Seoul for hosting this webinar. I will request Professor Emmanuel Pastrick to make a few comments before we start our proceedings in this webinar. Professor Emmanuel Pastrick.
Thank you for the kind introduction. And I just want to tell you what an honor it is to have a distinguished group to discuss such a critical issues today for cooperation between India, Japan, Australia, India, United States, and I have worked here as an American together with Dr. Singh at the establishing the Asia Institute and running programs like this for the last 12 years. And my field is originally Japan, so Japan is extremely important to me. And to have such a distinguished group to use a diverse imagination, vision, and inspiration, and a certain moral dedication to create a better world, to make an Indo Pacific construct, one that offers hope and inspiration to the world as we address tremendous, unprecedented challenges here in Korea, in Japan, throughout the region, and of course extending to India and the United States as well. So again, it's my great honor that we can host such an event, and I am very, very much looking forward to learn from this distinguished panel about what we should do next to create a more stable, peaceful world for our children. Thank you.
Okay, that's great, Professor. These are very kind words and very encouraging that we are looking for the solutions for the global challenges. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Today's topic is timely and compelling, as we know that the Indo-Pacific region is becoming a hub of attraction, both from the perspective of economy, trade, and development, as well as competition, security threats, and strategic challenges. Allow me to have a brief historical overview of this region. After the end of the Second World War, the United States became a guarantor of peace in the Asia-Pacific region. This contributed to relative stability in the region, and in the absence of security threats, the regional countries focused on their economic development. And China benefited the most, as it witnessed double-digit economic growth over the decades. However, the first year of the 21st century changed these dynamics with the 9/11 attacks. The United States shifted its focus from Asia-Pacific to Afghanistan and Iraq, and this created a power vacuum. As you are aware, power vacuums do not remain for long, so China was quick to fill this power vacuum. With a robust economy and rising military prowess, China initiated a regional order conducive to its own interests. In response to China's rising challenges and overtures, the United States started responding in 2011 and declared a pivot to Asia. Subsequently, this was further renamed as rebalancing in Asia, and ultimately led to the formation of the Indo-Pacific geostrategic construct. Whereas China announced Belt and Road Initiative in 2013. This led to divergence in approaches and put pressure on the countries in the region. to make choices. China's firming of its position over the East China Sea, South China Sea, and the line of actual control with India shifted the proposition from negotiation to deterrence. The formation of the quadrilateral security dialogue and the recent NATO and G7 summits added new impetus to the geostrategic and security environment in the region. This is further being conflagrated with the United States' formal alliances with Australia, Japan, South Korea, Thailand, and Philippines, and also several unilateral and multilateral arrangements that have emerged in the form of quadrilateral security dialogue, trilateral agreements such as Australia, United States, and Japan, and bilateral agreements between India and Vietnam, Australia and Japan, Philippines and Vietnam. So looking at these alignments, unilateral and multilateral, China also felt that the heat of these alignments, and it tried to establish credible deterrence. So China also proportionally entered into defense relationship with Russia and conducted joint naval exercises in the Mediterranean Sea, Baltic Sea, East China Sea, Yellow Sea, South China Sea, and Japan Sea. So China also conducts the counterterrorism and military exercises under the banner of Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Further, to expand in the Indian Ocean, now China is conducting naval exercises with Russia and Iran. Looking from the other perspective also, that we witness the defense budgets being on the upward trajectory. China's defense budget has increased to 252 billion. India is close to 73 billion, Japan 49 billion, South Korea 45.7 billion, Australia 28 billion, Taiwan 12 billion, and this way it goes on. So looking at these developments, the Indo Pacific region is becoming more contested. Therefore, the security environment is visible in rising threats, arms buildups, and volatile hotspots. The Indo-Pacific region is heading to a precipice where it is difficult for the states to remain neutral. So to discuss this in detail, I have a panel of eminent scholars who will analyze these issues from different perspectives. I have Dr. Lindsay Hughes. He holds a doctoral degree in national security from the Curtin University, Perth in Australia. He is a senior research analyst, research manager at Future Directions International at a Perth-based think tank. He analyzes the foreign policy and security policies of the Indian Ocean littoral states, China, Central Asia, and the United States. He has participated in the 1.5 track on Australia-India Security Dialogue and the Indian Ocean Rim Association Indian Ocean Dialogue. He has extensively published on the security and strategic issues related to the Indo-Pacific region. Then we have Professor Lakhvinder Singh. He is the director of the Department of Asian Security Studies at the Asia Institute in Seoul. He holds a double doctoral degrees and has availed a senior fellowship at Harvard University in the practice of trade policy in the United States. He is also managing editor of the Asia Pacific Business and Technology Report. Professor Singh has made an extensive contribution to strengthening India-South Korea relations. In the words of Dr. Seung-Ju Baek, the Vice Defense Minister of South Korea, Dr. Lakhvinder Singh is the father of India-Korea strategic partnership. That reflects his work. Professor Singh is an acclaimed writer who has published a book on India-South Korea strategic cooperation and more than 350 papers and articles in different media. Our next speaker will be Captain Sajin Kim. He's a decorated officer of South Korean Army. During his 9-year tenure, he played a vital role in the military, including serving on the front line. It is unique for an Army officer to author 3 books on interesting topics like Korean Military Academy's Cadet's Life, Reflections on Yoshida Shoin, the father of Meiji Restoration, and the root of the Korean military. Currently, he is a senior researcher at the Tajai Research Foundation in Seoul. His interests include strategic competition between the United States and China, the transition between civilizations, the Earth's future, East Asia, and the Korean Peninsula. Then we have our young scholar, Ryosuke Hanada. He is a research scholar at the Department of Security Studies and Criminology at Macquarie University in Australia. His specialization is in Japan's foreign and security policy. Previously, he worked as a research fellow with the prestigious Japan Institute of International Affairs in Tokyo. He is a prolific writer and has published with several leading think tanks on issues related to Japan's security and strategic affairs. Finally, we have Dr. Preeti Singh. She is an associate professor and chairperson at the Center for Canadian, United States, and Latin American Studies at the School of International Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi, in India. She has published 4 books and monographs, mostly on comparative studies. She has availed herself of the visiting scholarship at the University of British Columbia, Australia-India Council Senior Fellowship, and Shastri Indo-Canadian Institute's Canadian Studies Faculty Research Fellowship. She has immensely contributed to strengthening India's foreign relations with Australia, Canada, and Latin American countries. With this brief introduction of our panelists, we look forward to a rich and insightful session over the next hour or so. After that, we will be open for question and answer session. I will start with Lindsay Hughes. He will speak on Australia's nuclear option in the current context of the Indo Pacific situation. Dr. Lindsay.
Thank you, Dalbir. I'd like to begin by thanking the Asia Institute for hosting this event and Dr. Dalbir Singh for organizing it. My co-panelists bring an extraordinary degree of expertise to the subject. Thank you all for being here and for inviting me. I'd like to address the issue of sovereignty as it relates to Australia in light of the heightened tensions in the Indo-Pacific region. Australia is at the forefront of that situation, given that it has borders on both the Indian Ocean and the Pacific Ocean. So we're at, as I said, at the very forefront of this situation. So let me begin. The Indo-Pacific region is in a state of significant tension today, and that tension has been brought about mainly by China's economic rise and its consequent military growth, both coupled with its tacit ambition to become the regional hegemon in the first instance. That ambition and China's refusal to comply with international law when international law does not suit its agenda, for example, its refusal to accept the ruling of the Permanent Court of Arbitration at The Hague in regard to its South China Sea claims. Those have seen tensions ratchet up considerably in the South and East China Seas. That ambition has also seen Beijing endeavor to strengthen its relationships with Southeast Asian countries and the Pacific Island countries. in an effort to, number one, contain the US's influence, and secondly, to diminish that influence in those countries. Now, worryingly for us, China under Xi Jinping has also decided, and it has stated that it is going to do so, it has decided to increase its nuclear arsenal from around its current estimated 300 warheads to 1,000. But Beijing has also previously stated that it seeks nuclear parity with Russia and the US. Now, if that is the case, then it has no option but to increase its nuclear arsenal to about 6,000 warheads. Its simultaneous construction of 150 nuclear power plants will be of definite assistance in that goal. As a consequence of all of those motivations, its actions, and its, to be frank, aggressiveness, its wolf warrior diplomacy and so forth, the AUKUS alignment between Australia, the United States, and the United Kingdom came into being. The predominant feature of that alignment, as highlighted by the media, has been the proposal to transfer nuclear-powered submarine technology to Australia. But there are several impediments to that plan, not least of which is the rate of manufacture of the new Virginia-class submarines. According to a report published by the Congressional Research Service on the 18th of this month, 3 days ago, the United States is unable to meet its own submarine manufacturing targets at this time, leave alone supply Australia with a minimum of 8 submarines, Virginia-class submarines. For Australia, this leaves us in a bit of a predicament, because as the current Collins-class submarines age, Australia has 6 of them, they are increasingly unable to meet current demands, strategic demands, and objectives. Essentially, then, Australia, an island nation, is faced with a diminished and diminishing submarine capability. We have only 2 Collins-class submarines on operational readiness. There is a second issue, a much lesser publicized discussion that is taking place in Australia at this time. Does Australia require a nuclear industry to support those submarines, those nuclear-powered submarines? One view is that it does not. But there are several reasons why a nuclear industry is required. What I will do here is introduce 4 that I think are relevant to the current situation in the Indo Pacific region. Very briefly. First, acquiring nuclear submarines without the supporting nuclear infrastructure is tantamount to surrendering our sovereign control over those platforms. The submarines would form a major component of this island nation's defense capability. So while we would operate the submarines, Australia will be dependent upon the supplier, whether that supplier is the US or the UK, to maintain and fuel the submarine's reactors. I'd like to go back to the first principles of international relations. I think it was Lord Palmerston who said, we have no eternal allies, we have no perpetual enemies. Our interests are eternal and perpetual, and those interests, it is our duty to follow. I'm not for a moment implying that the Australia-US relationship will be overturned. No, that is not what I'm doing. But that statement leads to the second reason that I'll discuss now for creating a nuclear industry. Let's consider a scenario Hopefully it doesn't eventuate, but it is, I believe, a reasonable and realistic scenario. Xi Jinping's economy is failing. We all know that. It is stalling. We have seen the mortgage crisis spread to 86 cities across China. To deflect attention, to increase, if that is possible, the nationalism in China, Xi Jinping decides to invade Taiwan. When he does that, the US takes military action to assist Taipei. Now, all of our wargaming shows that the US and its allies, Australia included, will suffer very large casualty rates. But those games, some of them also show that in the longer term, as the conflict progresses, that pain will be visited upon China's military forces, and the West will force them to retreat back to the mainland. Simultaneously, the West and its allies will impose economic sanctions upon China, which would further aggravate China's economy, bring it to a complete standstill. Now, fearing that the West would press its military advantage, and in order to send a signal that China remains a force and a major force to be reckoned with, Xi Jinping could decide to send a message to the allies. He could, for instance, decide to launch a nuclear strike at Perth, where I am, in order to force a ceasefire. Remember that China has always said that it would launch a nuclear attack if the CCP's rule over China is threatened. So why Perth? Well, Perth is an ideal nuclear target. It's geographically very remote. It's a remote population center with 2 million people. It has a huge desert to its east and a vast Indian Ocean to its west, which will help it to localize the effects of radiation and radioactive fallout. It is also the home base at Garden Island here in Perth to Australia's submarine force. So it makes an ideal target. So Xi Jinping launches a missile and wipes out Perth. The question now is, will the US come to Australia's defense and strike back at China, the mainland China, knowing that if it does, it leaves itself open to nuclear strikes? Specifically, the question is this: would the US risk the loss of, let us say, its entire western seaboard, Los Angeles, San Diego, San Francisco, Seattle, to compensate for Perth, for Australia's loss? Now, if what Lord Palmerston said about self-interest is valid, Washington will not do that. It will not launch a strike against mainland China, not a nuclear strike. After all, Perth has already been destroyed. What would be the point of risking all-out nuclear war because a very remote city that not many people know about has been reduced to radioactive ash? Critics of this scenario would argue, they have argued, and they probably will continue to argue, that in such an instance, the ANZUS Treaty will come into effect. I have my doubts about that. The treaty could be of no help. Let's look at Articles 3 and 4, the relevant articles to this scenario. Article 3 states that if any party's territorial integrity, political independence, or security is threatened, all parties will consult on the matter, no more. Article 4 states that any such armed attack and all measures taken as a result thereof shall be immediately reported to the Security Council of the United Nations. There's nothing in either of those articles to state in concrete terms that the US will come to Australia's assistance militarily. That is 101 of security alliances, the framing of security alliances. On the other hand, if Australia had a nuclear industry of its own, a sovereign nuclear industry, it could then make a sovereign decision to create its own nuclear arsenal, if warranted. Simultaneously, Australia is working with the UK and the US to develop hypersonic missiles under the AUKUS Treaty. Not many people refer to that. They're too caught up with the nuclear-powered submarines. If that goes ahead, then Australia would have nuclear warheads and the delivery systems to provide it with a sovereign nuclear deterrent. So if it were to be attacked with nuclear weapons, it could strike back against an aggressor using similar weapons. Now the question is turned around, and it becomes, would China risk the total loss of, let's say, Beijing, Shanghai, and Guangzhou by striking Australia with nuclear weapons? I doubt it. Australia's security would be, on the whole, better guaranteed. Just as nuclear weapons maintained the peace during Cold War 1.0, it is almost inevitable that they will maintain the peace and not enhance a nuclear war in Cold War II. So it is precisely that reasoning that saw two Chinese think tanks, the China Arms Control and Disarmament Association and the China Institute of Nuclear Industry Strategy, hold a press conference yesterday in Beijing, that's the 20th of July, at which they launched a report entitled "A Dangerous Conspiracy, the Nuclear Proliferation Risk of the Nuclear-Powered Submarines Collaboration in the Context of AUKUS," quite a long title. It appears that China is only too aware of Australia's nuclear potential, if it goes down that path, to create a nuclear arsenal. That's the second reason. The third reason to create a nuclear industry is Australia's climate change responsibilities. By reducing its dependence on coal-fired power generation plants, Australia could better meet its international climate change obligations. If it were to do so, it would show the Pacific Island countries in solid terms, in concrete terms, that we recognize their concerns and we take their concerns about rising sea levels very, very seriously. The fourth reason, and this is also a powerful one, it comes back to the US. The fourth reason is Australia's relevance to the US vis-a-vis the Indo Pacific region. Canberra is an important partner to Washington because of its geographical location and because of its ties to the region, the South Pacific and Southeast Asia. If Australia were to add a nuclear arsenal to that mix, Washington would see little difficulty in giving Australia further responsibility for the region and thereby even strengthening the Australia-US relationship. It will further the relationship and it will further other facets of the relationship, not just military. So in summary, I am of the opinion that Australia has much to gain by creating a nuclear industry in order to better ensure its nuclear defense, but also to meet its global obligations. That nuclear industry would have political ramifications. Yes, there is no doubt about that. But we would also have very positive outcomes from creating that industry. All of these issues, although internally focused at this point, could have a major impact on the situation in the Indo Pacific in the longer term. And I have been advocating for a nuclear industry for some time. Hopefully, just hopefully, somebody will start paying attention. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Hughes. You have made your argument very clear that deterrence can be built through nuclear energy development. The argument is very clear. Thank you very much for such an insightful discussion. Now I invite Professor Lakhvinder Singh to speak on India's strategic perspectives towards the Indo-Pacific region. Professor Lakhvinder Singh.
Thank you, sir. Actually, I'm not going to talk about India's perspective. I'm going to give a very general perspective about why this construction is needed and why we should play an important role in the building of this important construction in the region, geopolitical construction in the region. So my basically, my paper is basically general in nature. It's not. Can you see this?
Yes. Yeah.
Is it clear?
Clear. Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Can you read the text?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
The most important question which I'm going to discuss is this: why we need to involve in this geopolitical construction project? What is the need? And why? The answer is very simple, and so that our children live in peace, prosperity, and law-governed states. The very survival of rule of law is at stake here. So even though we don't properly understand the gravity of the situation right now, but if things go uncontrolled, things can turn to that. So very at stake is the very survival of our way of life. So we have to unite our efforts while we still can and build a viable deterrence to the power shift in the region. So in India, we are a deeply religious people, God-believing people. Our faith in God is very strong. So, but currently, the kind of challenge we face, the very survival of our trust in God is being challenged. And we are strongly democratic country. And then once again, our trust in that political system is being challenged. Thirdly, Gandhiji is our father of nation. He always talked about peace and non-violence. But the aggressor is talking about building a strongest military in the region. So our fundamental belief system is being challenged. So in God we must trust, in democracy we must trust, in Gandhiji we must trust. And if required, we must defend these three values with the strength of arms. So let the push begin. I'm going to start my paper with a basic introduction of the region. As you know, this region is very important. Almost 60% of the world population lives here, and 60% of the total land area is here, and 22/3 of the world growth is here, economic growth is there. Military as well economic wise, this region is very, very important. So whatever happens here is going to influence the whole world. So the rest of the world cannot simply escape the consequences of power shift in the region. Four important economies: China, Japan, India, and South Korea are based in this region. And these four economies are driving force of the world economy. So we simply cannot ignore what is happening. So
Yeah, continue, please.
can you see the page number 2?
Yeah.
So as the power shift is happening, it's very important that United States deter China in the region, and they try to restrain their ambitions in the region. As you know, China, by using the military power, the economic power, they are trying to change the boundaries of the region. The region's claim. So China see more and more countries being pushed back by China. So without the support of USA, we simply cannot maintain the current balance of power in the region. So we strongly feel that without the support of the United States, this region cannot keep the current order in the region. So USA must lead military as well as diplomatic alliances. But this time, what we have to do, that the regional country have to join as equal partner of stakeholders. What was happening in the last 70 years was a regional country like Japan, Korea, and even Australia was junior partners. Not anymore. Countries are no more able to want to join as a junior partners. So USA has to accept the power shift in the region that country like India, country like Korea, country like Japan, even country like India want, country like Australia want equal share in the construction of a new order. So this is the point. I strongly argue that USA leadership should understand that fundamental power shift has happened in the region, that are gone out of those days when USA can rat its rate in the region and try to enforce its own perspective in the region. That those days are gone. So if USA really want to have a deterrence to China, it has to accept the regional country as equal partner in the construction of the new world order. Now, I would like to talk a little bit about Korea. As you know, for some time, Korea was resisting USA's call to join the region as a partner of Indo Pacific construct. But recently, we have a change in the government, and Korea have expressed its willingness to join the new Indo Pacific construct. And that is a very good shift. So we should, all regional countries like Japan, Australia, and India should welcome Korea in the new perspective, and they should support South Korea in meeting its new responsibility. As you know, South Korea is under tremendous pressure from China not to join Quad, not to join Indo-Pacific construct. So if we really want Korea become equal player in the region, we have to help Korea to some extent to relieve its pressure, economic pressure from China. Otherwise, it is not possible for, if we leave Korea alone, it will not be possible. It will not be possible for Korea to play active role in the region. Korea want to play very important role in the global security arena. But because of its heavy dependence on China economically as well as military threat, it simply cannot meet the challenge alone. So I strongly believe that regional countries like India, Japan, and Australia should help Korea to reduce its dependence to some extent on Korean exports to China. So to some extent, we should accommodate some Korean products into our market. So we have to provide kind of some special facility to Korea and special concession to Korean products so that Korea can, to some extent, it's not possible to shift 100% Korea's trade with China. But if we make a strategy as a perspective, as a united front, that Korea must be helped to move away from its dependence on China, then we can have a collective strategy, collective policy to reduce Korea dependence on. But this cannot be done individually by India as well as Korea, so Japan and Australia. So what I'm proposing today is that we should have a collective strategy, collective policy, how to reduce Korea dependence on China. And Korea is strategically very important for us. And without Korea's proper participation in the region, and we simply cannot deter China's continued expansion into the region. So Korea's role, strategic importance, as well as Korea's economic importance, must be properly understood. And the challenge Korea faces from China should be properly understood. Then we should have a regional-wide policy, how we should help Korea to in its new avatar, its new role. So this is an important point which I want to make today. I think that this construction project cannot be successful until we adopt a mutual help policy. What is a mutual help policy? That, like, let's take the example of India. We need a lot of help from Korea, from Japan, from Australia. Like for Korea, we need a lot of military technology to modernize our armed forces. From Australia, we need a lot of raw earth material to fulfill our fourth industrial revolution. Because fourth industrial revolution cannot be successful until we have this rare earth material products from Australia. and Korea, we need Japan to build our social infrastructure in India. So if these three countries join hands as a strategy, as a policy, that India must be helped. Then in the same way, we can respond, India can respond that as a policy, we can have a country-wide policy. Three countries join, help one country. Japan, Korea, and India. Japan help to Australia. Japan, India, no, and Australia help India. So three countries have a mutual help strategy. We try to identify important areas where we can help each other. And once we identify each other's capability and capacity building, then we can have a comprehensive strategy how we can fill the gaps where China is pushing us. Like for example, China is producing 61% of rare earth products. And rare earth products is the future of the world. Whoever controls this production will rule the world. But good thing is that Australia can help India to fill the gap. So if India, Japan, and India, Korea can help India to become the alternative production house of rare earth products, then we can counter China's dominance in the rare earth products. And rare earth products is the key for digital revolution in the future. So we have to have a strategy, specific strategy to counter China's dominance in this region, because future belongs to digital world. Digital world cannot be successful until we have a dominance of rare earth products. So currently China produces almost 61% of digital products. So until we have the specific project, the specific perspective, specific what we call strategy in mind, we can be successful. Suppose if India and Australia try to build some rare earth material, it will not be successful, because then economic factors come into play, profit and loss come into play. But once we do it as a strategy, once we do it as a regional-wide policy, then those considerations have become minimum, and then a bigger picture come into play. So if we adopt the bigger picture, then the economic factors, profit and loss will not come into play. So we have to adopt a bigger strategy. Suppose Korea has a very good military technology, but Korea is not sharing with us. But once Korea is made to understand that India need to modernize its armed forces, that we cannot afford expensive military technology from Israel, from USA, from Russia, and Korea can help us modernize our armed forces and modernize our navy in the Indian Ocean. So if Korea adopt that strategy and give us their technology without much economic consideration, then we can build our military. Then we can build our navy, powerful navy, which can challenge, which can at least deter Chinese navy in the region. Same way, we have to build our social infrastructure. In India, social infrastructure is very bad. So far, Japan is trying to invest some money, but that investment is coming only from economic perspective. There's no strategic perspective. But once we have group as a group, then Japan start investing in India and social products as a part of bigger picture, as part of bigger regional strategy. Then those money will flow for bigger reason. Then we can fill the gaps between our needs, social needs, and the investment products. Then India can become much more rich and prosperous. So the point I want to make is that so far we are talking about regional construction, but there is no ground level coordination between the four countries to fulfill our needs. Until we don't adopt those needs, capacity building gaps, we are the gaps. Same way, India can help with these four countries in multiple ways. Once we have so profit and loss, market forces will not be allowed to prevail. We have to have a bigger picture. As I said in the very beginning, the very survival of Indian civilization, of our Lakhvinder states, is at stake. So we have to understand the gravity of the situation we are in. We cannot simply underplay. As long as we try to underplay and we try to say that problem is not great, then we will keep going like this, and nothing will come out of it. As you know, there's some serious problem that when economic factors come into play, and that each country start taking over its own profit and loss, then protect like this collapse immediately. So until we really we understand that mutual help is the only alternative to survive the coming grave situation. So we have to start cooperating at a bigger picture level. So now I'm going to talk about what are the challenges we are facing in the construction, this project, this social project, this Indo Pacific construction project. biggest project is USA. As you know, when Mr. Trump was there, he was openly talking about withdrawing forces from Korea. He was openly talking about USA first. So there's a major section of population in USA who don't believe in that USA should keep involved in the Indo-Pacific region. So USA's involvement in the region is not granted anymore. Gone are those days in which USA was thoroughly committed to the region, but not anymore. Now USA's involvement is very ad hoc, very ad hoc. US is not able to open its economy to the regional country anymore. US is not able to bring a new weapon system to the region anymore because US is not able to batter China anymore. No, so biggest problem or biggest challenge for us, how to convince USA to stay engaged in the region. Because if USA is forced to leave this region for multiple reasons, this project will collapse. So all of us, all the 4 countries should provide a special incentive to USA to economically, to militarily, to stay engaged in the region. This is very unheard of. I think not many scholars have talked about this point before, but I think time has come when we should create special incentive package for USA to stay engaged in the region. This is, I don't know if you have ever heard this thing, but now I feel time has come when we should create a special package for USA to stay engaged. Otherwise, as the day passes, it will become very difficult for USA leadership to convince the American population to stay engaged in the region. So believe me, fundamental power shift is happening in US society, and it will take something more than just peace to convince Americans to invest their resources, invest their army in the region. So gone are those days when US was automatically assumed that it will keep staying engaged in the region. Last time, Trump was very serious withdrawing forces from Korea. So USA engagement is not guaranteed anymore as it was used to do. Second point is, is the legacy issue. Legacy is that regional countries don't trust each other. How can we build such big grand project when the countries don't trust each other? So legacy issue is a serious issue. So we have to create a new narrative, new perspective, so that people trust each other. Like Korea and Japan don't trust each other. They don't. During the last administration, Korea was not able to talk to Japan. It was so distress level. Even Vietnam or the East Asian country don't want to work with Japan. So legacy, but legacy is still there, and it hurts in people's emotion. So we have to create what we call truth commission. To soothe people's feeling. Don't ignore this point. One more time, I'm telling you, don't ignore this point. Emotions play very high in the region, and until we in India and Australia don't come forward to soothe people's feeling, this project will not succeed. Koreans will not be able to work with the Japanese. Vietnamese will not be able to work with the Japanese. Philippines will not be able to work with Japanese comprehensively until their hurt feeling is not soothed out. So what we can do, country like India, country like Australia should come out with a special package. Should come out with a package to soothe the people's hurt feelings. Don't ignore this point. One more, I'm going to tell you, don't ignore this point. Even though this is a minor point, but this plays very big in the people's mind. Last 5 years, Japan, North Korea didn't talk at all. 4 or 5 years wasted, Recently, we have a power shift, change of government in Korea. So we have come and started, we have put a dialogue with Japan. But before that, even communication was completely stopped. So another important point is boundary issues. Now, regional countries are having a very serious boundary issue with each other. And they can go to an extent to claim territory from each other. And this boundary issue can also spoil the whole project. So what we need to do, we have to create a new conflict resolution institutions through which a regional country can solve their boundary problem. And there are security issues. And there are other disputes among themselves. So until we cannot just keep pushing into Pacific construction without doing the groundwork. So we need a first thing is that we create a new conflict resolution institutions where Korea and Japan, Vietnam and Japan, other countries can solve their mutual bilateral disputes among themselves. So there should be total peace. If we really want to build a stronger and a powerful alliance of democratic forces, they should be able to solve their disputes democratically. Here, Gandhiji come into play very well. So that is why I want to bring Gandhiji. Gandhiji gave us a very powerful method to solve our disputes through peaceful resolution. So that if we in India can propose to these countries, look, please try to understand the bigger picture, try to see the situation, how grave is the situation. Please do something. Please create an institution through which you can solve your boundary and other disputes. And Gandhiji is a perfect model. But Gandhiji is a perfect model to solve their boundary problem. So India as a leader of a peace, India can play a very active role in building a new institutional mechanism through regional country can solve their disputes, boundary disputes, very important. Now, recently, if you see, recently, we are talking a lot of talk about supply chain resilience. If you go to any international conference, you will see these big leaders are always talking about supply chain. But it's not easy. It's simply said than done. Replacing China with the supply source will take something much more than empty talk. Because China has resources to produce one of the best products at a very cheap price. They have both technical know-how as well as financial resources to produce supply raw material at a very cheaper price. So no other country can, do you like it or not like it, no other country can replace China as a supplier of raw material or first products, primary products. So what we need to do, once we really want to replace China as a source of our supply chains, so what we have to do again, we have to help each other. We have to create new fundamental institutions which can produce those products which are being used by Korean factories, which are used by Japanese factories. So it will take time. It will take systematic planning as well as systematic strategy to replace China as a supply source. So every time diplomats and politicians keep talking, they want to do it one thing, one meeting, and that's done. No, it cannot be done in 1 minute. It will take years. And we have to come out with a perfect strategy, industry by strategy. Strategy by. So it's not like this. One pencil, you draw one pencil and you create a new supply chain in 1 day. No, we have to create industry by industry. So we have to have what we call get into the business, and we have to see which country can replace which products, like Vietnam, Thailand, India. So we have to identify which country can produce which thing. So we have to get very serious into this picture. If we really want to stop our dependence on China, to avoid future blackmailing by China. So we have to, once again, we have to join our heads to see which product can be produced by which country, like Vietnam, India, China, Thailand. We have to see, once again, we have to help each other. We have to provide resources. We have to make a big investment. Once again, this can be done only when there's a collective strategy. When there's a collective strategy, collective view prepared. Until we don't have a collective strategy, we simply cannot have an alternative supply chain sources. We must understand this point. We must understand that our diplomats and our politicians are doing empty talk. To make us successful, we have to get real, and we have to make country-wise strategy. Which country can produce which things, at what price, and how other country can help that country to produce those raw materials. Another important point why China is success is that it's investing a lot of big money into social investment projects, BRI. So I don't know exact figure, but people are saying China might have invested as much as $1 trillion into the region to fulfill its social protection responsibility. So it's very, very big money, and Chinese money is not a capitalist money. So it's not profit oriented. It's not profitable, but we in democracy, in the capital society, our money is a profit oriented. We simply cannot invest our money into projects which do not produce profit. So there is a difference. That is a real challenge. How to invest in the social projects and counter China, our money, because states in our country don't have money, don't have big funds. How to convince our corporates to invest in social projects, or be in India as a government, or be in the region as a governments can create a fund which can counter China's big push into the region. So again, this cannot be done in 1 minute. This cannot be done in 1 year. So this has to be collective. You have to join what we call joint heads. How we can counter China as a big investment in the region. because our money is private money. Our money is led by, influenced by profit making. But Chinese don't care about profit. Sometimes they put their money like
Professor Singh, try to sum up, please.
Okay, sorry, thank you. Sometimes, like in Sri Lanka, they keep putting money. They will not worrying about profit. So like they can do the same thing anywhere. Okay, so so okay, so there's a lot of good things are happening, as you know, and Korea has agreed to join the Quad, and ASEAN, despite pressure from China, has refused to China line. So things are not that bad. So things are like recently NATO declared China as a country of concern. So NATO has joined, and both of Japan, Australia, and Korean presence was there. So NATO is showing a lot of interest in the Chinese expansion. So we are getting help from in the world. And then Korea, another country also now, earlier the support for the Quad was very minimum in Korea, but now Korea has convinced themselves that we should be the part of the new process. So things are happening, positive things are happening that we can be hopeful that something can be done to make us successful. Now, I will try, as the time is short, I will try to conclude my remarks with 3 points only. Now, India has to be more proactive. So far, we are just talking. We are not doing much. As I told you, we have to get specific. We have to do something. We do something on the ground. We have signed bilateral agreement with many countries in the region, with Australia, with Japan, with Korea, but not much happening because both of things are just on the paperwork. So my first suggestion is that if India want to be player, it should do something, get it done, something more important that just empty talk, emojis, you know. So I strongly feel that time has come that India should get specifics, country by country, product by product, and technology by technology. You have to get more serious. You have to put more men into the region to devise strategy. Number 2, which I want to say that good thing is that in the recent days, China's image is taking hit. So many countries, not only Korea, but other countries also, Japan, Southeast Asia also, have started seeing China as an aggressive country. Earlier, China was seen as a benevolent country, spending their money for the good of the mankind, but now not anymore. So China's image is taking hit. So more and more countries are becoming concerned about China's growing intervention in the region. So that is also positive for us, that we can build on this, that we people are now started feeling. So China's image as a socialist country is taking hit, and China, most and more people are feeling China's role in the region.
Okay, thank you, Professor Singh. It was very comprehensive analysis.
Thank you very much.
Of the comprehensive analysis of the developments in the Indo-Pacific region. Your argument is very strong that the middle powers in the Indo-Pacific region should be the first responders to the challenges, and there should be mutual interdependency, and also they should offer preferential treatment to each other. And your argument is well taken that the Gandhian way can be one of the possible solutions for peace and prosperity in the Indo-Pacific region. Thank you very much. Now I invite Ryosuke Hanada to present his paper on the important role Japan plays in the Indo-Pacific region. Ryosuke Hanada.
Thank you very much, Dr. W. Alawat, for your kind introduction. And thank you very much, Asia Institute, for hosting this event. First of all, because this is the first time to speak in the international conference after the tragedy on the July 8th, let me show my sincere respect and condolences to the passing of the former Prime Minister Abe Shinzo. He is a controversial figure in South Korea, I understand, but in this context of the Indo-Pacific, I think it's worth to note his name, and it's impossible to make a presentation without referring to Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. So please forgive me to express my respect and condolence at the beginning. So the question I'm addressing my presentation, maybe 10 minutes, is how Japan has survived and will try surviving in the intensifying US-China rivalry. What's Japan's formula? What's Japan's strategy? I will spend most of the half of my presentation to discuss the Japan's formula. Then I also note some changes under the current Kishida administration. Then I will spend the last couple of minutes to discuss maybe I was inspired by Professor Lindsay Hughes' discussion about the nuclear option and Professor Shin's discussion about Japan, South Korea. So I will address some of those 2 points at the end of my presentation, if I have time. So first of all, there's actually the 3 pillars in Japan's basic strategy after the rise of China, or to counter the rise of China. The first is enhancement of the alliance with the United States to improve the deterrence. So this is the first agenda for the Prime Minister Abe after taking or returning to the office in 2012. His first agenda was visiting the United States and then assuring the alliance, which was devastated by the previous administration and the Democratic Party of Japan. And he revised the US-Japan security guideline, and also he passed the collective self-defense legislation to enable Japan to recognize the attack on the United States as the attack on Japan. Of course, that was still limited, but that was a big step forward from the Japanese perspective. And the second pillar was expanding the partnerships among like-minded countries. I think this is quite consistent with what the 2 professors has already discussed. But Japan's security partnership with Australia has improved significantly, and especially I should note that the reciprocal access agreement was agreed between the 2 countries. That was the first agreement for Japan after the, apart from the United States. And now Japan is negotiating the RAA with the United Kingdom. Prime Minister Kishida just visited Germany to attend the NATO summit last month, and he met with the former Prime Minister Boris Johnson already. Then talk about a reciprocal access agreement. So, and also, of course, I should note India as the one of the most important pillar in Japan's sort of the Quad partnership. Japan has now information sharing agreement, defense equipment transfer agreement, and also they are discussing more the joint exercises to improve the interoperability between the 2 militaries, not just between 2 navies, but the tri-service interoperability is already on the table. So Japan is expanding those unilateral or the partnership with like-minded countries in order to, I think that maybe there's 2 reasons, in order to mitigate the risk of the US withdrawal. Of course, Japan doesn't believe the US withdraw from the region because the first primary interest is enhancing the alliance, but they have to have some risk hedge strategy. And the second is it's a bit it's just the same thing, but in order to keep the United States engaged in the region. I think the partnership between Australia and Japan is not just for the 2 countries, but it served to the US-led international order and the US hub and spoke system. So it will incentivize Washington to keep engaged in the region by enhancing the partnership among the allies. So the concept of networking alliances or networking partnerships are especially important in the current situation where we see the relative decline of the United States vis-a-vis China. And the third pillar is internal balancing. Japan has been, resting the unilateral pacifism after 1945 for a long time. They refrain from taking any military actions abroad. They do not increase the military budget beyond 1% of GDP. But now, and after Abe Shinzo's leadership, Japan changed its direction and increased the defense budget gradually. And in the NATO standard or NATO's calculation, Japan now spends 1.2% of GDP on defense, and then Kishida administration is now trying to increase dramatically. Although he doesn't refer to the 2% of GDP in the official statements, but I think Japan's direction toward a realist shift, or I call realist shift, but I think Japan's becoming normal power is already in line, and I think there's no matter or whoever becomes a prime minister of Japan, it is very difficult for him or her to change this direction in the coming years. And during the Kishida time, I already mentioned some of the Kishida's achievement, but there's 3 basic changes in Japan's policy or Japan's formula. One is the more reference or articulation about the Taiwan Strait in the official statement. When the former Prime Minister Suga visited Washington, D.C. last year, it was the first time that the bilateral summit document referred to the Taiwan Strait. It was the first time after 51 years, and Kishida administration inherited. And then when President Biden visited Tokyo last month, of course, they again repeated the importance of the Taiwan Strait in the US-Japan Security Cooperation context. So that's the one big shift from the Abe time. Abe personally was very interested in or investing himself, dedicating himself in the Taiwan issue, but officially he couldn't refer to the Taiwan. But his successors, Suga and Kishida, is now referring to Taiwan as Japan's interest. That's a big shift. Of course, China opposed to those statements, but I think the Japanese current leadership is already determined to at least make the diplomatic rhetoric about Taiwan. There's still uncertainty whether Japan will take action against Taiwan or to protect Taiwan, but there's of course the big change. The second change is of course Russia. After Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the Japanese Prime Minister Kishida clearly shifted its tone about Russia and clearly criticizing Russia's violation of international law and joined the SWIFT economic sanctions. And so I think, during the Prime Minister Abe, he met with President Putin for 27 times, visited Russia 11 times. So he believed that it is important to have some stable relationship with Russia. I think that he had two purposes. One is trying to preventing Russia and China's further alignment. Abe didn't want to have facing both Russia and China as well as North Korea simultaneously. And the second is of course for domestic goal, the agreeing on the peace treaty and resolving the territorial dispute. Japan still have the three unresolved issues with the neighboring countries, with South Korea, China, and Russia. And Abe's approach was first addressing this Russian one, and then have at least established some stable relationship with Russia, because his priority was how to counter China. But Kishida changed this direction, and there's no discussion anymore about the peace treaty with Russia after the Russian invasion. And I think there's no public support for doing that. 70 to 80% of Japanese public now supports Kishida's tough stance on Russia, joining the sanctions and standing with other G7 members to criticize Russia, despite the remaining unchanged territorial issue or unresolved or unagreed peace treaty. So this is the second big shift. And the third shift is the internal balancing. Again, Kishida administration will revise the three key defense documents of Japan by the end of this year: National Security Strategy, National Defense Program Guideline, and the Midterm Defense Review. And one important change is the Kishida administration seems to be determined to implement or introduce the counter-strike capability. As some of you know, the Japanese Constitution's Article 9 prohibits the possession of the Navy, Army, and Air Force, and any other war means. And so that Japan has stick to the defensive defense policy after 1945. But now the Kishida administration will implement those counter-strike capabilities, and without reinterpreting the Constitution. Interestingly, although when Abe introduced the collective self-defense in 2015, there was a big public opposition, but now there's not big public opposition to those ideas. So I think that's the third big shift that we are observing in the Kishida administration. And the time is running out, but I think I should mention that the consistency from Abe is that Japan is, what should I say? It's like articulating itself as the guarantor or guardian of the rules-based order. There was of course, the concept of the free and open Indo Pacific originated in Abe's speech in 2006 in the Indian Parliament, 2007 Indian Parliament, and the free and open Indo Pacific concept has been adopted by the United States, Australia, and the EU, European countries, and of course India is approaching that concept as well. So the consistency of protecting the international order is something that I should know that Japan's unique leadership in the post-war era. And I think that will be continued. And Kishida will, of course, have some uniqueness in the non-proliferation policy. I mean, he has 5 pillars and he put the non-proliferation as one of the pillars. Although, despite those some small differences, I think that Japan will continuously invest itself in those free and open Indo-Pacific concept and those order building efforts. And the Quad is one of the major pillars of the FOIP. It is great that Quad leaders agreed on the Maritime Domain Awareness Cooperation, Space Situation Awareness Cooperation, and agree on the $50 billion infrastructure in the region. And Japan itself will invest more in the capacity building of Southeast Asia, like training the 800 Coast Guard officials in the region, or spending $2 billion for acquiring some patrol ships that was expressed in the Kishida's speech in the Shangri-La Dialogue this year. So those are some, basic things that I have to explain about Japan. Then finally, by using 1 minute to each, the nuclear option and then relation with South Korea. So in terms of nuclear option, there's also the big change in Japanese public attitude. Now, according to one poll, there's 57% of people agree on discussing the nuclear sharing with the United States, and then 32% opposed to even discussing. So please be careful. It's not the supporting the nuclear sharing or possession of nuclear weapons, but this is a big public shift. It's a shift in public opinion. But still, according to the many experts, especially nuclear experts, there's a lot of hurdles that Japan will be nuclear power. For example, the resilience of the nuclear retaliation capabilities. Japan's land space is very limited. In order to have the retaliation capability, Japan should have deployed some submarine launched ballistic missile capabilities in the Pacific side, but Japan doesn't have any nuclear submarine yet, nor nuclear launched submarine ballistic missile. So it will take time. Even if Japan has been called as the de facto nuclear power, there's a long way to go. And also the way Japan can do the nuclear test. Well, do we do that in the Pacific side? But now the Pacific Island countries are very important for the strategic cooperation in the Indo-Pacific. And so surface or underwater nuclear test in the Pacific side will be unrealistic. Or maybe at maximum, they can borrow the place from the United States ally. But of course, the public will oppose to the possession because of the still remaining legacy of the Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So I think there's a long way to go. And second, South Korea. I think there's some good, shift in the Japan's relation with South Korea after Yoon Suk-yeol administration took off. Yoon Suk-yeol administration sent a delegation to Japan, and they met with Abe and Kishida both. And I think both leaders' participation in NATO was one of the big symbolic, but it's important progress that the two countries shared some concern about China. So the way to go, in order for the two countries to further promote their cooperation, I think there must be two important things. Although, I agree with Dr. Shin that we need to address some legacy issue, but I think the one is the military to military cooperation and the building up or restructuring, reestablishing the trust between two militaries. I think the Japanese self-defense force still have some distrust toward the South Korean Navy, only Navy, because of the fire radar incident in December 2018. Unfortunately, until that time, I could say, military to military cooperations are part or as not affected by the domestic political struggle or legacy historical issues. But after that incident, that's intertwined, or every issue is intertwined, and then those bilateral animosities are dominating the bilateral relations. So I think the first step I'd like to see is the two militaries will come together again, maybe with the United States or Australia, and establishing the trust building between the two militaries and the sharing their threat perception, not just against North Korea, but China. This is my last remark. Whether Japan and South Korea can cooperate more depends on how much they can perceive China as the threat. And South Korea's resources are so variable. For example, in Southeast Asia, the Huawei is investing hugely in the capacity building of the technicians. Like according to the report published by ANU National Security College in July this month, Huawei is promising to train 100,000 digital technology experts in Indonesia. I think South Korea has the great conglomerate like the Samsung and LG, and of course their semiconductors capabilities and capacity to produce is indispensable for this Quad or free and open Indo-Pacific. So even without formal participation in the Quad, there's already the agenda that South Korea can join in other countries to improve the capacity of the Southeast Asian states. And that might be the first strategic cooperation between Japan and South Korea, or Japan, South Korea, and plus in the region. That's, I think, the great potential for the two countries to pursue. Sorry, that's it.
Okay, that's great. Yoshiko, you have articulated your ideas very well under different pillars. And you have very much focused on Article 9, nuclear option, and role for this self-defense forces in Japan. Perhaps all this indicates toward the Shinzo Abe's legacy that he has left. Whether he has left big shoes to fill in, whether the existing or the future leadership will be able to fill in the shoes or not, that needs to be seen. But your points are very well articulated. Welcome, General Arvinder Singh Lamba, to the webinar. If you have some comments, please feel free to add. Okay, I think we can take the comments later. Now I invite Professor Preeti Singh to highlight on the Latin American region and its perspectives toward the Indo-Pacific region. Because generally about Indo-Pacific region, we confine it mainly starting with the India and to the Southeast Asian countries. But Latin America also has middle powers, and those middle powers have their own orientations toward the Indo-Pacific region. That I think Professor Preeti Singh will enrich us with her.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Dalbir. And I also thank the Asia Institute for having invited me today to talk about the Latin American perspective and the significance of the Indo-Pacific construct. Before I start, I would also like to share my colleagues' feelings about Shinzo Abe's loss, palpable also in India. So I thought I would just put that on record. We have been talking about it for quite some time, and especially in the in the context of the Indo-Pacific. Okay, so I'll broadly be speaking on. I'll be making 4 basic points, major points as far as Latin America is concerned. The first thing that I'll be talking about is where is Latin America in this Asia-Pacific, Indo-Pacific construct. Secondly, the role of China in influencing Latin America's orientation. The third thing I'll bring forth is about the move towards Quad Plus and Latin America, and the kind of discussion that's been taking place, at least here in India, on that. And the fourth thing is about the factors that are influencing Latin America's Indo-Pacific inclusion, why Latin America is inclined towards the Indo-Pacific. So if we even Google Latin America and Indo-Pacific, you would find that many scholars writing on the subject they have described Latin America as being seen as having its back towards the Pacific. So the reason for that is very clear. I mean, if you look at even at the map of Latin America and especially South America, the western coast, which has the Andean mountain range, is also known, it's also been called the backbone at times of Latin America, or the spine of Latin America. But at the same time, it limits South America's access to the Pacific. At least historically, it has done so. And therefore, transatlanticism has really played a major part in Latin American history. So historically, what I'm saying is historically, Latin America has not been inclined towards the Pacific. And the traditional powers influencing Latin America have obviously been the United States and Europe. And now, of course, it is European Union. US has dominated the geopolitical decision-making in the region. I mean, I think from the end of the 19th, all of 20th century, certainly. And then in the 21st century, as we all know, there has been this shift towards Asia. And therefore, I would say towards also the Pacific, especially with China increasingly playing a very important role, not just globally, but especially in Latin America. I think influencing Latin America in focusing towards the Pacific region. Now, with these recent changes in the international dynamics that most of us talk about, for example, the US-led TPP, which was coming together in 2016, but it was remodeled into the CPTPP. And without the United States, I mean, that is the core of it. So it's not been very easy for Latin American countries to be part of this change. I mean, if you look at the Pacific economies in Latin America, Mexico is the first country to have ratified its membership of the CPTPP, the remodeled TPP. Peru, I think, yes, Peru also in September 2021 has joined it. Chile, which was, I mean, one of the main countries it's been these three countries, Chile, Mexico, Peru, have been members of APEC. Chile has yet to ratify. I mean, they're signatories, but they have not yet ratified. The reasons for that, of course, is the internal dynamics, certainly for Peru and for Chile. Their countries, they're struggling with protests. And then, of course, the pandemic certainly played a major role. And now the election of the new president, I think just in March 2022 in Chile, Gabriel Boric, again, who I think he just made a statement saying that he would wait for the new constitution that is going to come up in Chile before he even starts discussing TPP or the CPTPP. Anyway, so all I'm trying to, the point I'm making is that it has been not so simple for Latin America. And outside the CPTPP, well, Latin America has had very, very nascent links or few links with Asia. Because mostly Central America, Caribbean, again, most of the trade flows, connections flow north. And Mexico, yes, it's closely integrated with the North America, even though it has a trans-Pacific relationship, but it complicates that relationship because of its integration with North America. So even, I think one of the scholars from Moscow State Institute of International Relations has argued that why it was China's influence that led Latin America to turn towards Asia-Pacific region, but now it is facing competition with the Indo Pacific construct. And therefore, the argument is that Latin America needs to reorient itself to benefit from this new regional architecture that is coming up. Latin America's orientation towards Asia-Pacific, of course, have become pronounced with the creation of, I think, Pacific Alliance, which I'll talk about a little later, which was created in 2011. Of course, I've mentioned its role, increasingly greater role that it played in TPP and FIALAC. FIALAC is the Forum for East Asia and Latin America Cooperation. It was formed, I think, at the turn of the century, around 1999 or so, and almost 20 Latin American countries are member of this forum. So let me talk about then, therefore, the Chinese influence in Latin America, without which I don't think we can even say much about Latin, because China has started playing such a major role in Latin America of late. First, 4 points here again, quickly. First, that China's economy is already somewhat large, at least in terms of purchasing power parity than even the United States. And especially in South America, China has become its leading trading partner, of course, I should add, trading partner, having displaced in certain countries, displacing even US and Europe or the European Union. Like Brazil, countries such as Brazil, in certain years, you would find China is doing much better than the United States, Chile, Uruguay, China. I mean, I can go on. China is the largest investor, I think, in the mining industry in Peru, for example. largest buyer of copper, iron, oil, soybeans, etc., etc. So basically, the Latin American regions boom in the decade, which is considered, the commodity super cycle, as it is referred to, between 2003 and 2013, was largely due to the Chinese demand. The second point about China is BRI, which has already been mentioned. So to just briefly say that as of May, I think 2022, there are 21 Latin American countries and Caribbean countries that have become members of the BRI, and including Argentina, because Argentina, Brazil, Colombia were resisting joining the BRI. I don't know how much difference it actually, I mean, that's another debate, how much difference it makes, whether they do join or they don't. But Argentina has also now joined the BRI. Thirdly, more countries in the Latin American Caribbean region are recognizing China now. Why I'm saying that is vis-a-vis Taiwan. So many countries have cut off their diplomatic relations with Taiwan and are recognizing China. And the latest being Nicaragua in 2021, December 2021. And fourthly, of course, China has been increasingly playing a very important role in the regional groupings, Pacific Alliance included. And Pacific Alliance is my major argument for even for the Indo Pacific construct. But now you have China, of course, as an observer along with India in the Pacific Alliance. Then China and the China CELAC Forum. The CELAC is the Community for Latin American and Caribbean States, which was formed in 2012. And why I'm mentioning it is because it has almost all 33 countries in Latin American Caribbean are members of CELAC. CELAC had approached India, I just thought I should mention here, around the time of its formation for some kind of collaboration, but India took its own time. And meanwhile, by 2014, we have the China CELAC Forum being formed. So also, of course, China led RCEP, though Latin America there is not really present, nor is India, of course, but RCEP is now playing globally an important role. And China has also expressed its interest in joining the CPTPP now. So, I mean, the successor of TPP. So, and then of course you have BRICS and BASIC where India is involved. So in this scenario, with this kind of an influence that China has, at least economically speaking, over Latin America, where is the Indo-Pacific? So here, let me talk about India's vision. Very briefly, I just want to mention for the Indo-Pacific region, India says that it has a very inclusive kind of a vision, and that was made clear by Prime Minister Modi in the Shangri-La Dialogue in 2018, from shores of Africa to the shores of Americas. Now, shores of Americas, whether it is restricting itself to North America or we want to move down a little to South America as well and include the Americas, in the Indo-Pacific construct. So having said that, the Indo-Pacific concept, of course, has expanded, I would say, the Asia-Pacific to the West. And the Quad and the Indo-Pacific are symbiotic, at least from 2007, ever since Abe's speech in the Indian Parliament. But it seems to have become very active since 2017. I'm talking about Trump, Trump's free and open Indo-Pacific strategy towards the Asian speech. So the activity seems to have increased since then. And Quad, of course, has remained as a strategic dialogue, but now we come to Quad Plus. Now, Quad Plus included representatives, we talked about South Korea, yes, South Korea, Vietnam, and New Zealand. In 2020, I mean, the concept has been there from 2013, I would say, but in 2020, it became a little more concrete. But in 2021 and May of 2021, the dialogue, which was the Quad Plus, included Brazil and Israel, but my focus is on Brazil. So Brazil was included, which is a non-Pacific country. It was a discussion on, the global response to COVID-19, so which is why perhaps Brazil was included. But there was a lot of criticism. There was a lot of criticism of inclusion of Brazil in the list of countries by inclusion by US, of course, in this dialogue. And some of the scholars and I can quote out here, was saying that this is because of Brazil's abject lack of appreciation of the Indo-Pacific framework in its foreign policy calculus. That was the criticism of Brazil. Now, I don't totally agree with that. I'm not saying that I agree with that criticism, because having included an Atlantic country, there was its own logic, perhaps the size of the economy, the kind of strategic influence that Brazil has over the South American region, and its own, in foreign policy, its own desire for strategic autonomy, which I think India somewhat identifies with as well. And the fact that in the Indo-Pacific context, for Brazil, it would require a kind of a curated approach that US on one side, its kind of relationship with US, and on the other side, its economic dependence, you could say, on China has to be balanced by Brazil, and also its contribution within the BRICS construct, where the other members of the BRICS are, well, geopolitically, they are Indo-Pacific stakeholders. But what is clear, to me at least here, is the rationale of the logic of including the Pacific countries. I mean, and the Pacific Alliance should not be ignored. I mean, for example, Chile as a part of the Pacific Alliance. So, so what would influence, or what could influence Latin America's Indo-Pacific inclusion? So I will raise just these few points that I have talked about. Its relations on one hand with the US, with China on the other, the balancing act. Its relations with economic centers in Asia, including Japan, importantly, and of course, South Korea. And the dynamics of regional integration, which includes, of course, Pacific Alliance, which I'm focusing on, but also a failed UNASUR. UNASUR was the Union of South American Countries, vis-a-vis what is now in place, a PROSUR, Forum for Progress, which is, I mean, there is a politics behind this. So that, then CELAC, of course, which I have already mentioned, which was created in 2010 or so. So, and of course, Pacific Alliance. Now, Latin America, therefore, and this is the point that I'm really trying to make, is that Latin America can engineer a more balanced, a more unified, a more future-oriented trading relations with its Pacific Alliance trade bloc. The four Pacific Pumas, and they're very commonly called that, Chile, Peru, Colombia, Mexico, and they constitute almost half of Latin America's trade, much of which is not internal, but it is external. It's looking outside the bloc for trade. And therefore, it's a free and open trade alliance, which is in tune with the IPEF framework, I mean, the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, which India also has become a part of in, I think, from May 22, this is in the Quad summit that was held in Tokyo. Yeah. So India's trade also with the grouping has been growing, and the Pacific Alliance has negotiations with Australia, with New Zealand, with South Korea. And I think it's ideal for Latin America to turn from a peripheral player now to become a kind of a catalyst in the Indo-Pacific construct. So, and just the last point, and I'm going to stop here, Dr. Tuti. The last point about India, I mean, for India looking to add momentum to its Indo-Pacific construct, I think, extending from Eastern Africa towards the Pacific, I think the Pacific Alliance could provide a kind of an appropriate platform, we could say. And it's very expansive. It has 54 observer members, including China, Japan, India, US, Indonesia, etc., etc. So thank you. I mean, maybe we can have some further discussions if time permitting.
Okay, thank you, Professor Preeti Singh, for an insightful discussion where you have clearly highlighted that Latin America is moving from Atlanticism toward the Pacific Oceans and has strong orientations toward the Indo-Pacific region that generally we are unable to get in the literature. Where literature is more focused on the Indian Ocean and the Pacific Ocean, mainly in the Southeast Asian countries. So this is a new dynamics that you have presented us, and it is a thought process that now a bigger Indo-Pacific region needs to be considered. Thank you very much. General Arvinder Singh Lamba is here. Welcome to this webinar. And if you have some comments, please feel free to add.
Dr. Dalveer Elawat, Dr. Lakhvinder Singh, and other panelists and all those on this audience. It's a pleasure to join this group, sir. I'm grateful to Dr. Lakhvinder to give me this opportunity to be a part of this group. I just had a few points. It's a very wide expanse covered. And I'll just give a backdrop that Dr. Lakhvinder and myself, we have analyzed two dimensions very, I feel, comprehensively on what India-Korea relations ought to be, where should they be headed in the larger interest. And more importantly, what is Korea's status and role in India's Indo-Pacific? I think these are two dimensions that we've tried to touch. And we have written about them. One is gone in Korean Times and one is published in the Hindu newspaper in India. I think comprehensively we've seen the two countries are virtually on a pedestal that they could make a difference. I had written initially on India-Korea strategic partnership. That is a new dynamic because I think with the change of the new president, there is a new direction which realigns itself with the United States and with India in a very big way. And the big change was that it's not looking at North Korea and China the way it was in the previous few years. So we had a new start and we called it a new dynamic, and we spelled out a few things because in my view, there is no region in the world that is more conflict prone and so complex as the Indo-Pacific. There are subparts to Indo-Pacific in the detailed studies we've done, but in any construct we identify, I think Korea and India happen to be a part of every subset of this larger system. It was wonderful to hear the last speaker talk about Brazil and South America and other countries. I think that's a massive expanse, which should be our next line. Where should we go? But in the sensitive region back close to the straits between South China Seas in the Indo-Pacific, this tract of land, this 1,000, 2,000 kilometers of maritime space is something that's most conflict prone. And the dimensions raised by you all are phenomenal. Some of them come to mind, 2 or 3 points. First, that it's a community of nations, not just democracies versus autocracies, but it's a community of nations that needs to come together to create what I have always felt in the Indian Army, having served and right till my last appointment, overseen the Chinese border, that we need a virtual bulwark that must not only prevent our territorial integrity and security, which is deeply threatened, nobody knows it better than India, but also a bulwark that deters China from making any invasion or any large-scale involvement or any situation like probably Ukraine anywhere. The second thing is China's perspective has definitely broadened. It has learned both sides of the lessons, one from Ukraine and the other from the situations that are existing, now developing towards closer to Japan. So the second construct is when you see China's assertiveness, in fact, it's no longer assertiveness, it's outrageous aggression with what is happening closer to the islands of Senkaku and Japan, and the world, the region is seeing a dynamic catapult. We see Japan saying things, particularly after Shinzo Abe is passing away and he's being assassinated, that there is a need to come back and strengthen this bulwark that we really need. So the strength, I have written, and Dr. Lakhvinder and me have written together, that India, South Korea, Japan, and some other countries, right down to Australia or the other elements of Quad, are imperative if any bulwark has to be effective. The maritime space being intruded upon by China is a dimension that no nation can match. And therefore, it's a collective defense or a collective deterrence that we must create. And I have a few points, but I think the time would be short. I would just stop here by saying that this is a new domain that we are opening. If one analyzes, this is the new region where Vietnam, right from Vietnam, Philippines, India, Japan, and South Korea, is a new arena that must evolve together, that must take a collective defense forward to ensure that none of these countries can really be threatened in terms of territorial integrity and sovereignty. Everything that China says cannot be always believed at face value. And nobody knows it more than us, who've been through 26 talks, border mechanism talks, settlement, and we are still far from any settlement. So I think all of us would do well to consolidate our thoughts, the wonderful thought processes that you all have shared today, the eminent speakers have shared, is a need, it's timeline for consolidation. Just like Asia Pacific turned into Indo Pacific, and I recall that the first major dimension when I was invited by the visiting Congress delegation to see how this move forward, how this could move forward in 2018, I had 2 points. One, that the Indo-Pacific Command is a must, and that was the time they were considering it was a Pacific Command, so it became an Indo-Pacific Command. The second one was India does not have the resources, and several $1,000 million were allocated by the Congress to say that if India is the key to this strategy, but does not have the resources, which will happen in many cases, they must be empowered by both not alliances, but I would say cooperation. And we did a series of 4 categories of agreements, which brought us on par with the capability of United States. So I would, sir, just stop here to say that this is the definitive conflict-prone, highly intense arena in the immediate future, because I do not believe China would wait for very long for Taiwan. That's been my personal view. It would not wait for 2025, 2027. The timeline is as short as one can see it. Second, we need to consolidate all that we say to each other. And third, there will be no direct, this is not time for any direct alliances or agreements. United States and Ashley Tellis particularly has been always propagating a strong alliance with the United States and India. But the way India's strategic economy has not only evolved, but been expressed and shared with the world with no less than the External Affairs Minister directly to his counterparts in other countries, it shows that alliances probably may be the second or the third option. It will be strategic partnerships that can be consolidated to an extent of good mutual understanding of just 2 aspects. 1, what is the common threat? 2, what is the threat to individual nations, and how can the community respond to stop any major actions by the adversary? Sir, I'll stop here. Thank you for this opportunity, and I thank the forum for giving me this chance.
Thank you, General Lamba, for your comments. These are very valuable and very practical steps that you have suggested to be followed in the future. Okay, now we open the forum for questions. Any questions from Adri Sekhar, Somu Kumar?
I want to ask one question to Mr. Lakhvinder Singh. Can I ask?
Yeah, feel free. Yeah.
Okay, ma'am, I was listening to your lecture very attentively. So I just want to understand what will it take to bring this Latin American country to Indo-Pacific construct. As you know, the problem is that they are not feeling the heat as much the heat we are feeling in this region. So it will be very difficult to convince Latin American country to join our grouping. And as you said yourself, that these countries are benefiting from the engagement with China, you know. So it's a very, as you said, balancing act. So what it will take to bring them to our forum, and what kind of role, what kind of capacity building they can bring into our forum, you know. How can they strengthen our agenda in the region?
Okay, so for one, of course, they are benefiting a lot, and this is more from China, and this is more of an economic partnership at the moment. China has a lot of economic influence on the region. This is, and of course, so does the US. There is no doubt about it. But with the US, because the US is its immediate so-called big brother, you know, has been. This is, I think, security-wise, US would always tend to have more of an influence. So this balancing act is very difficult for Latin America. Now, having said that, what is Latin America going to do to move towards the Indo-Pacific is your question. You know, India has already taken, and here we were just talking about the strategic partnerships and no alliances, right? So I think even in Latin America, we have strategic partnership with Brazil, way back from 2006, with Mexico, and with Argentina of late. You know, 2019, I think the strategic partnership has already been signed. So India, of course, it's a very slow kind of a movement between India and Latin America, but it is rapidly increasing now. And when I say that Latin America is, of course, being influenced a lot by China, but that is not to say that there are no apprehensions in Latin America. The more the influence of the Chinese in the region, the apprehensions are growing, because if you take examples of the kind of investments of the Chinese, you know, the kind of role, one of the main apprehensions is that the state plays a major role in the company's true or false or whatever. I mean, that is not the question here. I'm not going to go into that. But the apprehension is that the Chinese state is playing a major role. Whereas with India, it's a completely different, the kind of investments that are coming in from India are more private companies moving in, the kind of development cooperation that we have, you know, with some of the Caribbean countries. China, you compare that with China in the Caribbean and with India, the kind of investments India is making in the Caribbean. I can talk about so many things, you know, wherein India has more of an influence, even in small states, small island states like the Caribbean in this region. So, I mean, one example, I'll just take the diaspora. So that itself is a very strong influence in the Caribbean states like Trinidad, Tobago, Guyana, Suriname, etc. And that has also led to military alliances. You know, military alliances in terms of the kind of equipment that is being bought through lines of credit or whatever, but it's sort of slowly increasing. India's influence is slowly increasing. So I think we are already on the track, right track. And we've been talking for a number of years about sort of increasing the pace of the interaction between India and some of these Latin American countries, which can play a very global, I mean, it can have a global impact as well. Brazil already has been, I mean, has been partners with India in many of the forums, global forums, international forums. I hope that answers to some extent your question.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Platform is open.
I'd like to ask Hanada-san a question about the recent poll in Japan about the popularity of the nuclear factor. Japan already has about, correct me if I'm wrong here, but over 300 tons of refined uranium in Japan itself, in Europe, and stored in the US. How does that figure into, what are your impressions of how that figures into Prime Minister Kishida's plans regarding China? Thank you.
Yes,
Thank you.
please.
Here's your question. I'm not sure the exact amount of the nuclear disposed materials, but I think between non-nuclear to nuclear possession, there's one step available for Japan. That is hosting US nuclear capabilities. So medium-ranged and short-ranged ballistic missile with a nuclear warhead. And it's located or stored in the US bases in Japan, or either Okinawa or Iwakuni or Misawa in the northern part. So I think at this moment, as a political reality, where we still have the strong non-nuclear sentiments among the public, I think the realistic or feasible step is hosting those nuclear capabilities of the United States. And that's actually already discussed in the policy level from the Trump administration's decisions to abandon the, I forgot the name, the bilateral non-middle range ballistic missile between Russia and the United States. Sorry, I forgot the name of the treaty. So I think there's already the discussion, and I think at the maximum, rather than taking those nuclear disposal and use it for the nuclear weapons in Japan, I think Japan will seek the US first, and that's already domestically controversial. But I think at this moment, I can't imagine that the Japanese government will announce that they will produce the nuclear warhead domestically. And also, as I said, the resilience capabilities, where Japan can store those nuclear warhead in those small limited land space. So that will be the big challenge for Japan. And we have the 120 million population with those small area. So wherever we try to find a place, it is very difficult to find those nuclear storage. And missile defense capabilities are not perfect. And if Japan decide to produce and store the nuclear warhead in Japan, that will incentivize our neighbors, especially North Korea and China, to think about how they disturb or domestically intervene those, Japanese politics, or maybe they will start a cognitive war, cyber warfare, everything. So I think realistically, US alliance should be the primary for Japan at this moment. But thank you for your question.
Oh, thank you.
Yes, I want to ask one question to Mr. Handa. I mean, given the constraints that USA economy has, to what extent you can depend on USA security in the long term? As you know, in case of North Korea, there was a very serious issue that Mr. Trump asking almost 5 times more money than the current Korea was paying. So in the future also, Japan is more expensive than Korea. To what extent, what happens if Americans in the future start asking 5 times or 10 times more money for protecting Japan? So can you, honestly speaking, depend on American security system to protect your country against China in the long term? And but as you know, problem in the USA is very serious. Now there's serious fundamental division in USA politics, and Trump is not alone. Trump is just a figurehead of that section, So there is a lot of a powerful lobby emerging in the USA, which is not in favor of keeping engagement in the region. So now this country is very low profile, but in the future, as the economy gets worsen and China gets stronger and stronger, there's by high possibility that USA may not able to provide that kind of support to the region. And Japan is a very important country, and completely relying on it, USA may be kind of a strategic mistake for USA. So what is your thought on this?
Thank you, Dr. Shin. And I'd like to ask the same question to Dr. Shin, because regarding the South Korea's response to those future possible scenarios. And in terms of Japan, I think there's two ways to respond to those US requests. One is the quantitative, and the other one is the qualitative. In terms of the quantitative, whether Japan can increase the host nation support twice or 3 times, I think that's not likely, to be honest, because of the fiscal limitations. Now Japan has 100 trillion yen annual budget, and defense is only 5 trillion. And actually 65% is fixed for social welfare, paying the interest rate and then local subsidies. So it is impossible for Japan to double defense budget in 5 years, for example. unless they will make the political decision to cut off those social welfare. And then Japan is the aging society, same as South Korea. 30% of almost 30% of our population is over 65 years old. I'm not antagonizing against the elderly people; they're very good. But what I mean is that the government has to spend money on those elderly generation. So quantitatively, Japan has a significant limitation. What Japan can do more is a qualitative change. First of all, having offensive capabilities, investing more in the defense industry, and then promoting the arms export, which has been failure for a long time, at least after 2015. And also they should improve the quality of the people, especially in the quantum technology, AI, and cyber. And an investment in those education would improve the quality of the self-defense force. Now, SDF can no longer hire the 10,000 Japanese young people every year. That's impossible because population is declining. So I think that qualitatively, we should have high quality SDF officials and more unmanned vehicles, which do not need the human involvement. And I think the high tech is the only way we can answer to the US request. Okay, Japan is doing this amount to help to protect itself and also to contribute to the alliance of the US alliance system. So maybe South Korea is in a similar situation. So if I may, I'd like to hear how South Korea have whether they have a good idea or not. I mean, I'd like to hear your thought on that.
What happened in the case of South Korea? South Korea registered Mr. Trump's request for 5 trillion, 5 times increase in the budget, because South Korea could choose. We are not Japan. We are a poor country compared to Japan. So Japan was said, okay, you can go to Japan and ask for, because Japan is a richer country. But in the case of Japan, they cannot say we are poor, because basically, Japan South Korea took the excuse that we are not that financially strong that we can pay you 5 times more money. Number two, now and they agreed, the South Koreans agreed that we will support your Indo Pacific initiative, like Indo Pacific Construct and Quad. Don't ask for more financial support. We will support you. So to some extent, South Korea was able to cover the gap. So they were able to make American happy, because under President Moon, South Korea was not supporting Quad. South Korea was not supporting Indo Pacific Construct, and South Korea signed 3 no agreement with China. And 3 points was very irritating to USA. So, but now new administration has removed those 3 irritants. So I think to some extent, problem has stabilized. But my point is bigger picture, bigger question. I'm trying to draw your attention that what happens if public opinion in USA changes fast, that they should not stay engaged in the Indo-Pacific. And then what can South Korea, India, Australia can do? I'll come to the same point which I started with. That my point is that time has come when we should start preparing a stronger partnership with a real country. My friend, Professor Lakhvinder Singh, has written a very strong article a few months ago that time has come when we should start thinking that post-American world is possible to some extent. That time has come that we have to start thinking that a time may come in the future. Let's pray it don't come fast, but it can come in the future then when Americans are no more there. So time has come when India, Japan, South Korea, other democracies should join hands and start preparing for post-American world. As I said, I have many American friends. I go to this American seminar almost all the time, and they can feel if you go to US, you can feel the air that something is missing. That kind of commitment level is not there. That kind of unquestioned commitment to the region is not there. Now they're questioning in the Congress, in the institutions, everywhere, why we should stay engaged in the region. But how much money we can spend, how much money we should spend to confront China. So those questions, and to what extent we can go to defend Taiwan. So those questions are being asked. Because as you know, challenging USA in case of Taiwan means nuclear war. So USA may do its own math in the future. To what extent they should go into war to defend Taiwan, to defend China, to defend Japan, to defend South Korea. So you have their own math. We don't know their math. So, but we have to do our own math. What are the possibility of building a own alliance system, own partnership of the four countries I'm talking about? Yes.
Yeah, I think this was very well summed up by Lindsay Hughes about Australia's case study, that Australia should go for minimum but credible nuclear deterrence. Perhaps, Lindsay, you may add up further.
Sorry about that. Yes, I believe that Australia should go for a minimum nuclear deterrent. We have, like Japan's bomb in the basement situation, we have the ability, we have the raw materials, and we have the skills required, the skill sets required to put it all together. Now, when you incorporate all of that with Australia's tie-ups with the US and the UK, with hypersonic missiles, for example, we also have the delivery systems. What we could do in that instance would be to offer sort of a semi-permanent umbrella, nuclear umbrella, if you wish, a regional umbrella, so that we therefore create an alliance, or even a semi-permanent alliance in this instance, within the region. Now, if we have a nuclear power like India to the west and of the Indo Pacific, and if we have a nuclear power like the US to the east, to the right of us, that situation could only be strengthened by having another nuclear power in the middle. And to the extent that Australia borders the two oceans, the Indian Ocean and the Pacific, it stands to reason that this arrangement, the Indo-Pacific region, could only be strengthened by having a third nuclear power within it. That is my impression. I stand to be corrected.
Yeah.
But I think there is some validity to that thinking.
Yeah, that's very good.
Thank you. Thank you for that question.
General Lamba, you would like to add to this?
Thank you, Chair. I think two words I'd like to touch upon, which I have experienced. I've been in a dialogue with Pakistan for 7 years on military to military engagement and nuclear engagement for a few years.
Yeah.
The first part is minimum credible deterrence. Excellent concept, but very hard to define. Where do you draw the line, sir? And India's challenge is, you have Pakistan on one side, you have China on the other. More than the deterrence is the doctrine that actually matters. So I figure in all my writings, I draw distinction of a perspective in two parts. One is your deterrence. That means the quantifiable deterrence that you have in the number of missiles and so on. And I know that, Professor Hanada was probably alluding to the intermediate range nuclear force treaty that fell through between Russia and US that made everything go into turbulence. I think that's the one that made, because while that was in place for 20 years, China made its heyday manufacturing the best class of missiles in this category, and it suddenly appeared. So I think deterrence is one thing that you've got to declare. I mean, if you want a deterrence, you'll have to say, well, I have this power, this nuclear force with me, just like China has, and it has a huge force comparable to any other. When you say the first rocket artillery, it's phenomenal. It covers half the West's weapon systems in one organization. That's my detailed study. So I think, sir, when you say minimum credible, you will have to define what it is. And if you can't define in terms of quantum, you have another way to do it. And that's what India does. you have a nuclear doctrine. If you remember, sir, about in 2012, Pakistan introduced the short-range nuclear missile. They called it the tactical nuclear weapon, TNW.
Yeah.
And I was a participant in some of the early discussions on TNW because I was part of India's forum that wrote India's proactive strategy way back in 2006. And all these things are actually interrelated. So we have to pull back on proactive strategy because it became a deterrent, but it became something that was overwhelming Pakistan conceptually to justify greater support from other countries. And that's why we realized our pullback, our proactive strategy is actually empowering Pakistan. So having done that, deployed it on the ground, we pulled back and we decided not to do it. So the second point I'm coming to is, the numbers aside, what doctrine do we use? India does not have a declared doctrine, but when you talk about talk to anyone, there is an understood doctrine. I think why I'm saying is not doctrine, because there have been recent fluctuations. The original stand that we experienced was an all-out second strike. The unsaid statement is no first strike, an all-out second strike, and this formalized sometime around the TNW of Pakistan. And a TNW is just a weapon nuclear capability of 60 kilometers range. The danger with that country is when you fire at 60 kilometers, you'll have to be deployed about 20 to 30 kilometers behind your own front defense line. So when you fire it at 30 kilometers inside the other territory, the threat is you will get the fallout will come back into your country depending upon the atmospheric conditions. But we took that opportunity to say, well, you bringing in two things we said. Our doctrine is an all-out second strike. We are clear in our mind, and it's given us good dividend to say we will never be the first ones to strike Pakistan or whoever. But we said, if Pakistan fires one nuclear missile, all-out strike, well, I'm saying clearly, means nothing then will be spared. That's my individual. When you say an all-out second strike, it's nobody needs any interpretation. So I think for Australia, it's a very good justification, sir, perspective you've given, that if you have US on the east of Indo Pacific and you have India here, a strength of a nuclear power is definitive addition to the threat and deterrence or collective deterrence for China. I agree, and I've read a lot about what Japanese constraints are. In fact, in UK, we've had some very good discussions, very insightful discussions, why it's taking Japan so long to come out of its defense forces. It's only authorized a defense force. It's not authorized a military. But I am one person who supports that the moment they're out of this contract of 1945, Japan will be a country, a different country altogether. Where it will keep its nuclear fissile material, well, I don't know, but they will be capable of handling it very well, and China knows it really well. So, sir, two things I've said. One is deterrence. You might calculate, you'll find it very hard to fix the number, but should you not be able to, it's the doctrine that will play a part and not just the numbers. The point is very valid that a limited, so limited is also has its own catch. It means that you're ready to go to some extent, but not the whole hog. And that's why India had to adopt that no first strike, but should it happen, it's an all-out strike. So I leave it at that, sir. And particularly you see the Russia and China, the mass of fissile material and weapon systems ready with them on a triad basis, that means Navy, land, air, and Navy, maritime, are so profoundly different from us. We can only deter them. We can never match them. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
That's good. Very well put. Yes. This was reinforced by President General Musharraf also, that he should have strike, but there was fear that India will blow Pakistan. Okay, any last questions from you youngsters? Prashant, Adri Shekhar, Sonu, Kuldeep, Surya Prakash. Any questions you want to put? Okay, then we can conclude this session. Thank you very much, all the panelists. It was great to discuss in depth from different perspectives. And also I would like to thank General Arvinder Singh Lamba for your valuable input and highlighting your own experience that you have gathered over the number of years into the specifically the nuclear energy deterrence and other conceptual clarities. Thank you very much, all of you. See you sometime next time.